All right. Hey, everyone. Wes Bunn, Senior Technical Writer here. And today we're going to be talking about some of the changes that have gone into the media framework tools as of Engine 4.18, which is coming here shortly. You can access these tools right now by going to the launcher and downloading the preview version. That'll allow you to kind of experiment with some of the changes that we've been making to the media framework tools. But if you want to work with video inside the engine, you're going to have to use these tools. And there have been some changes since the previous iteration that we're going to kind of cover today, as well as some of the new features and things that you can do. We're going to answer your questions at the end. I'll try to answer as many questions as I can. The questions that I can't answer, I'll take those offline and I'll pitch those to our team and try to get responses for you. But I wanted to jump into the engine and show you some of the changes that you can start to expect and experiment with right now. So we're going to jump right in. We have a third-person template project up here. This is just a blank project. And if you have not worked with Media Framework, don't worry, we're going to cover just some of the basics as well as we go along. So first and foremost, what we're going to do is inside of our project here, I'm just going to create a new folder just to keep track of everything. Right-clicking and just call it Media, something like that. And inside of our Media folder here, we're going to right-click, and there's a section called Media. So this is where all of our Media Framework assets are stored under this section here that we can create. There's some in here that are probably not going to make it into the 4.18 release. They're here in the preview right now, but after talking with our engineers, some of these options may come out, specifically the basic overlays here and the localized overlays. This is a work in progress, something that's going to be coming down the road. It's not necessarily working just yet, but we'll probably pull this out for the 4.18 release. Just to give you a quick overview of these really quickly, the basic overlays, if you create this asset, it's essentially what this will allow you to do is point to, for example, an SRT file for subtitles, things like that. It'll take all that information and parse it into this asset so that you can work with it inside the engine. Essentially, this, I believe, works right now, but there's another asset that you could use along with this, which is the localized overlays. So if you click on this, you create this asset, essentially what this will allow you to do is set up those basic overlays that we just created and assign one of those based off of your language code. So for example, you could create, let's see, if we create one here, yeah, you could create, and you could say that this is for French, for example, and then you could point it to a basic overlay that has all of your SRT for French content and Japanese and English and so on. Essentially, this was what is being worked towards. It's not quite working in its entirety yet, but just a sneak peek inside the preview. This is something that we're working towards, so I kind of wanted to touch on that. If we right-click under Media, there's 4 different types of media sources. We'll cover those here together. The first is the file media source. This is pretty much the same as it was in the previous versions of Media Framework. Create a file media source asset. And we double click to open it up. We can point to the source of media that we want to access from our computer here by clicking this button. And if we go to our desktop, for example, I have a folder with some media in it. And you can see I have some videos here, so I can select a video and it'll point it right to that video. Now, also noted in our documentation right now, you may see this little icon here. Basically says that this particular file that we're pointing to is outside of a specific directory that we use for packaging. So if you wanted to package this up and deploy it to Android or something like that, you'd actually need to put it inside the content movies folder of your project to have it automatically packaged with your project. Right now, if we were to package up our project, we would not have access to this because obviously it's pointing to a local location for this media file. So what you're going to want to do, again, this is covered in our documentation as well. If you go and let's just bring this back up real quick. And we browse to our folders, something like this, show and explore. Here's our content, our project and our content folder. We'd create a new folder in here and just call it movies. And we put all of our media assets in here. That way that our assets will get packaged with our project. So I'm just going to do that right now. Take all of my assets from the desktop and just drop them in there like that. Okay. So now if we come back to our project, you're still going to see that there, but if we point it to our content movies folder, that little warning will go away and our asset will get packaged with it. So just a thing to keep in mind if you're planning on packaging your projects with media in it. to go ahead and put it in that content movies folder. There's a player's override section. You'll see this on all of the different media source assets. Essentially, what this allows you to do is define the different player plugins that you want to use based on platforms. So for example, for Windows, we could come down and we could change this. Right now we have the Windows Media Foundation, but if we were to download the VLC player plugin, which you can get from GitHub, that would show up here, and we could specify to use that instead of the Windows Media Foundation whenever we're playing this media on Windows. It's just a way to define which player plugins you want to use based on platform. So we've created a file media source. If we go down here and we right-click, and we go under Media again, there's also a stream media source. I'm going to hop down to this one and create that. And if we double-click, it'll look very similar, except this time now we're specifying a stream URL. So this is something that we grab off the web. Been instructed to indicate that YouTube support is currently not working in the preview. It may not make it into 4.18 as well, but it's on our radar. There's a roundabout way that you can get YouTube direct links to work, but right now it's kind of like, as I mentioned, a roundabout way, and we're working on better support for that down the road. But other forms of URLs should work. I believe on our technical reference pages, it should specify which ones we support as well. But let's see if I just drag this off, and let's just minimize that for a second. Find a quick URL for us to use. And here's our documentation, streaming videos at a level for media framework. This is a how-to that kind of walks you through what we're doing today. It's going to change quite a bit, actually. I'm in the process of updating this documentation. Our media framework documentation is going through an overhaul with all these changes. We'll talk about some of those changes here in a moment. But what I wanted to get to is an actual link that we could use. So if we right-click this sample video and we copy this link address, we should be able to use this in our stream media source here. So if we go to our stream URL and we just paste that in, now we have a link to URL. And we could save that off. And again, there's our player overrides if you want to specify those there. Okay. The third method that you could use for source media, if you go to media, platform media source, okay, if we select this platform media source, and we double click and open it up, essentially this will allow you to define different media sources to use based on the platform that you're using. So for example, if we have a video, a couple of different videos we have, we're planning to push this to Android. We may have a video that's encoded in 3GP format that we want to specify to use for Android, whereas Windows, we may want to use a WMV or AVI file. We could specify those here, as well as defining different media entirely. You may have one video that plays for Xbox, one that plays for PS4. You could do that inside of the platform media source section here and specify which media you want to associate with each given platform. So for example, if I were to select Windows and I select File Media Source, it would just play this one here. Okay. Now these three forms of media source assets were there in the previous versions of Media Framework. The new one that we've added, if we right click and go to Media, we've added an image media source asset. This allows you to add image sequences as a form of media. So if we add that and we double click on it and open it up, you're going to see that we have the platform player overrides here. Then we also have the sequence path that we can point to. So if I click our browse to, I open up a path. We have a bunch of EXR images here. Right now, this only supports EXR in 4.18. Additional file formats may not make it into 4.18, but our plan for future, I believe it even says it in the tooltip that we're planning to support this in the future. But right now, EXR format, which is the most common, as well as PNG, you can point to your EXR images here. Another thing to note, if you've worked with image sequences in the past, you're going to need to set up a naming convention similar to this so that the engine knows how to process all of your sequences. So for example, we have our first image here, then we have our second, third, and so forth. What you're going to want to do is point it to the first image in your sequence, click OK. And now this particular asset knows that this is an image sequence, and it will process all of the additional images when we open this image media source. Okay, so there's some additional things with the image media source that we're going to talk about a little bit later as we get into the media player changes, which we'll talk about here in a moment. So we have four different forms of media source assets here. In order to actually play those back, we're going to need a media player asset, which we can get to by right-clicking and under Media, going to Media Player. Okay, And when we do that, we're going to get presented with this Create Media Player dialog window. And if you've worked with Media Player in the past and have not touched it in the 4.18 version, this is going to look a little bit different. There's an additional checkbox here that's been removed. I'm actually going to cancel this for a second to show you that. Let's bring up that doc again. So here's our doc. So this is the old documentation. We create a media player asset. You can see previously we had an audio output sound wave asset. Okay, this asset has been removed for 4.18. We've reworked the way that audio works with media inside the engine. Instead of creating a sound wave asset that you would actually end up dragging into the level, we now require you to create a media sound component and add that to whatever's playing your media in the level. If it's some kind of actor that's a billboard or a TV, you would need to add a component, a media sound component, and then point it to the media player, which we'll do here in a moment as well. But just wanted to point that out. The other thing to note is if you are using Media Framework prior to 4.18 and you upgrade to 4.18, you're going to need to delete your sound wave assets and create media components for those in order for your media to play and function the way that it was prior to 4.18. So one thing to note there. So back in our project here, if I right click and I create a new media player, we do still want to associate a video output media texture that we can use to create a material and apply to things in our level. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and click OK. And it's going to ask us to name this. So we'll just call it My Player, like so. Okay, so it's created that texture for us and our media player asset. Okay, so when I open this up, we're going to get the media editor. There's been some changes to this as well. We'll kind of walk through these here together. Very top toolbar is pretty much self-explanatory. This is the same as it was before. If we click piece of media, we can pause and fast forward, rewind, and etc. Directly below that, we have the path to the file that we're currently playing. It shows up here. This is useful for working with streams, as well as webcam or video capture devices, which we'll show you a little bit later as well in this session. But it'll list that here because you can actually open through Blueprint or C++ your media directly from this URL here, which we'll do a little bit later. You can also click this button here to reload it if you're working with a stream. That can be handy to reload it. We have a little drop down here. This is for capture devices, which we're going to touch on and show you how that works a little bit later. So I'm going to skip over that for now. On the center here is, as you can see, we're playing back our video. There's some overlays indicating what's going on in our video, kind of helping us see what's happening. So we have the name of our video, the actual player plugin that's being used here, the status of our video. And then on the bottom right here, this is for 360 videos, so the rotation and the FOV. In 4.18, this is not working in its entirety. This is something that we're currently working on, but the thought is to get this content in now, laying the groundwork for future updates to the media framework. But essentially what you'd be able to do inside of this editor here is like left click and drag around as you would with like a Facebook 360 video or YouTube 360 video, that kind of same thing. So kind of drag around in 360 view here and then mouse wheel up and down to change the FOV. And you can also do that inside of the details panel down here, which this new section has been added. Okay, we'll talk about that in a moment. Directly below that, we have the media library, all of the media assets that are available inside of our project. You can see all those here. We have a playlist section now, and this was here before, but this has changed a little bit. You can now create playlists directly inside of the media player itself, and then save those out as a new playlist, which is pretty handy if you can add the different types of media that you want and then create a playlist right there. Support for this is still limited. Eventually you'll be able to drag and drop media from the media library into this. Right now there's not a way to add that. May make it into 4.18, can't promise it, but it's the groundwork for the future, being able to create media playlists right here inside of the media player as well. Directly below that, the details panel has changed a little bit. We still have the play on open. We still have loop. Shuffle is new. If you have a playlist here and shuffle is enabled, it will randomly select one of the media sources inside of your playlist for playback. Loop is a little bit, maybe a little bit misleading. I wanted to point this out. So the loops option here is for the individual media source. With this option checked, it's going to loop the actual media source that's currently playing. So if you had a playlist and you wanted the playlist to loop, checking this option is not actually going to loop the playlist. It's going to loop the individual media source. To loop the playlist itself, there's a loop option inside of the playlist, and I'll show you that here a little bit later. Directly below that is the view settings. As we talked about, this is if you want to fine tune when we get to being able to support 360 videos. We don't have any player plugins that support that yet, but that's coming. We could fine tune and manually enter in information here as well. We also have an info tab. This is handy if you're running into issues and you're seeing that your videos are not playing back. One of the things we added, you could actually copy this to a clipboard now, post this to Answer Hub or to the forums to kind of let us know what's going on, what you're trying to play, so that we can figure out what's going on and help you get your media playing. So just another thing that we've added to kind of help you along there. One of the other things that we have here is the playback options. This was here before. Going to highlight this really quickly. So we have some different things that you can do here. You could choose the different decoder, the tracks option here. If you had a media source that has different audio or video tracks, this is something that we typically do. Like in Paragon, we have a video that has multiple languages. You can come in and specify those here. Right now, we only have one for this one, but I think we have another one that has multiple tracks. If not, we can add one real quick. Just going to create another media player asset. So, and this one will just use this multiple track one. So, let's save that out. So if we open this one here, this one has multiple tracks on it. So we can come in here under audio, and now you see we have different types of audio that we could cycle through. Should be able to hear that on your end, the different types of audio as well. Okay, and you can actually query these through Blueprint and specify these. So if the user, excuse me, at the front end has selected that their language is Spanish, then you can, through Blueprint, set it to use for your video to use your Spanish track if you'd like. You could also do that with video. So under video, you can change different videos, which you can do through Blueprint script as well. Very handy to consolidate all of your media into one particular file and then just change the tracks as you see fit and need to. We also have different audio formats. This one doesn't, but you could change the different audio formats if that's enabled. Captions and subtitles, text, all this stuff is pretty much self-explanatory. And we'll have documentation. I'm in the process of updating our documentation on this stuff right now. Okay, let's see. Let's go ahead and close this out. Let's close this out. Let's take a quick look at media playlist. If we right-click and we go to media under playlist, okay, double-click. Just click that. Playlist, as we said, there's that loop option. If we want our playlist to loop, just check this option here. And we can add options to the playlist by clicking the plus sign and then specifying the media that we want. Or you can just double click and it'll add them as well, like so. Okay, so that's a playlist. And if you right click, let's see, what else do we have in here? I do want to talk about the media texture. I believe we covered all of the options under here now. I do want to talk about the media texture because there's been some changes to the way that the media player works. So the media player asset and the media texture, the media player previously you would point to, I think I have it in our docs here, you would point to the texture that this media player is associated with. We've kind of reversed the way that that works, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So let's see if I have a media player, if I can bring up the media player asset on here. Is it on this page? Maybe it's on the other one. Let's see. I'll go back. Our media framework, how to use. So here's our old documentation. We create a media player. Yes. So here's the old media player asset. We had this output. So we had overlays, which is kind of been condensed into our basic overlays and the localized overlays options. So this is no longer there. Soundwave asset, we've already talked about that. This is gone and replaced with the media sound component, which I'll show you in a moment. And then we have our video texture. So we really just removed this whole section and replaced it with support for 360 videos down the road. So previously we had our media player. We would point it to our media texture. What we do now is we take our media texture and point it to our media player. This allows us to have multiple textures point to a media player, whereas before we could only have this one-to-one relationship. So let's go ahead and get back to our project here. So we no longer need to do that, but inside of our textures, if we open up our texture here, we now have a media player option that we can point to. Now, because I created our media player and associated this particular texture when I created it to this player. It was done for us. If I were to create a new texture, a new media texture, you can see this field would be empty, and then I would point it to the media player that I want to associate this texture with. Okay. There's another change that's been done to the material as well. This was done for an optimization purpose. If I delete this one, we don't need that one anymore. So we have our media texture here. We're going to turn this into a material that we can then apply to something in our level so that we can play it back. If I right click on this and create a material out of it. So we have this material and we open it up. Let's go ahead and make that a little bit bigger. Okay, we still use a texture sampler in order to play our media texture. And over in the details panel here, you're going to see under the material expression section, there's our texture that we're pointing to. But we now have this new sampler type option here, this drop down here. For all of your media framework, all of your media that you want to play back, if you're creating materials out of those, which you need to do to play your media, you're going to need to set this sampler type to external. Okay, this was done again as an optimization to speed up the decoding process. If you've created media prior to 4.18, this option did not exist. So you may need to go back and set this manually, as it may be set to something else. All the other properties are there, like color, grayscale. You're going to need to come in and change this to external for your content to work. If you change it to color or something else, you're going to get this error. It's going to say that this needs to be changed to external for it to work. So just wanted to point that out as well. Okay. So with our materials set up, we could actually, let's go ahead and do that and close it. We can actually apply this to a surface inside of our level here. If you've done this in the past, this process is still the same except for the audio aspect of it has changed, and we'll walk through that process together. So I take a plane, for example, and I just drag this into the level. And let's see, let's drag it up and just kind of rotate it around. I'm just going to make a quick kind of like big screen here. So something like this. So there we go. It's like a big screen. We can still take our material and just drag it and drop it on top, like so. And let's make sure that our material is working. It should play back. Yeah, so it plays back just fine in the level there. Whenever we click on a media source, it's going to get applied to that texture. You can see it updating in the texture. It's updating on the asset inside of our level as well. Now, previously, as we mentioned, if you wanted to have sound, we used to use the sound wave asset. We would drag that in so that it would play back. As we mentioned, that we now need to use a media sound component. Okay, and that can be done just by coming to the details panel over here. And if we just move this down, we're just going to add a component. You can do this if you create a blueprint actor, like a TV that's a blueprint actor. You can add a component that way as well. But you can also just come in here and add a media sound component. Okay, so. And then what you're going to do is, for the media sound component, you're going to scroll down a little bit. You're going to see what media player are you referring to. This is where you point the media sound to your specific media player. So it should now be associated with this here. So when we play back in the level, we should hear that sound. If we were to play right now, it's not actually going to open and play in the level. We need to specifically tell this media source to open and start playing in the level. In fact, if we test this, you should see it's just going to be a big blank screen there. This process is pretty much the same. If you've done this in the past, it's pretty much the same. You still need to create a reference to your media player, then tell it to open. In our particular case, the media player is set to play on open. So whenever we open this source, this media will just start playing. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go to the blueprints here and just open the level blueprint. Okay. And inside the level blueprint, I'm going to create a variable like so. We'll just call it the media player. Like so. Does need to be of the media player reference type. So media player reference type, like so. Once we compile, we can then specify which media player we're talking about. So we're talking about that one there. Okay. Now we should be able to get a reference to our players. If I hold Control and just drag that into the graph, we could do something like the 1 key, for example. So whenever I press 1, what we're going to do is we could drag off of this, and we can now say open source. Okay. So open a source whenever we press 1. And then we specify what source we want to open. So let's go ahead and open Let's just open our file media source like so. So if we compile, it's pretty simple blueprint script there. If we play in the level and we press 1, should open, should hear our sound, should be playing the video like so. It's currently not set to loop on our media player, so we could say loop this particular asset. So if we play again and we press 1, when it reaches the end, it should start playing back. So it just plays it over and over again. Okay. Okay, let's talk about some of the other things that we could do here. Let's go ahead and let's go back to our level blueprint here. And let's right click and let's add a to keyboard event. And let's see, so 1 opens our source. Let's go ahead and change that to our multi-track media source, which is this one here, I believe. Yeah, I'm actually going to rename this so I know what it is. We'll just call it F2 as a multi-track. So, and inside of our media player, it says multi-track. So we're going to open that source instead. So inside of our level blueprint, we're going to open multi-track. And what we could do is if we drag off a wire off of our media player reference here, under media, you're going to see all of the blueprint script that you can use, that you can call. I'll talk about some more of these here as we go along. See how we're doing on time. We're doing okay. Some of these other options that you could use. What we're going to do now is actually switch to the different tracks inside of our multi-track video here, which we could do if we search for company photo. Oh no. We could do select track like so. And what you're going to see here is we have a drop down to specify audio or video or some of the other different options, as well as the track index. So for example, we can come in and say, let's change to video 1, and then we can copy this and paste it. And we can change our video to audio. We can also leave that as 1 so that the video and audio should change when we press 2. So 1 is going to open our multi-track, 2 is going to change the track within it. Oh, let's go ahead and make sure that our media player is plugged in so we don't get any errors, which is nice. Okay, super simple stuff. If we play, we press 1, it should open that new media source that we specified there. We should have audio, and when we press 2, should change it to a different video with different audio. Again, if we press 1 again, it'll hop back to the other one. So super simple stuff. If you have a gameplay mechanic where your character is sitting on the couch changing TV channels, this is how you could do it. Very simple. So let's see what else we could do. Let's go ahead and talk about webcams. So webcams are a little bit different of a beast. You could have multiple cameras selected or attached to your computer, as well as your phone, for example. You could have a front or rear camera that you want to pull from. So we don't have a media source asset for that per se. We use this drop down here, and it'll show you the different capture devices that are attached currently. So for example, here's all the audio ones that I have. Here's the lone camera that I have here. So if I select this, you're going to see it should, hey, there we go. So it shows me here, and we could actually use this inside of our level now. So you can see there I am. That's a horrifying sight. Me inside the level there. If I were to play this, you need to open this a little bit differently. As we mentioned, inside of our player, we have the URL here. We can open directly from URL instead of opening source. I could copy this whole string here. And if we go to our level blueprint, we could say that the 3 key, for example, if we take our media player here, we drag off of it, and we say open a source, or not open source, excuse me, open URL is what we're looking for. Open URL, we can do, so we plug that in, and we just plug in our URL. It's like a Inception thing happening here, picture in pictures. So yeah, that's how you could set up a webcam. You could also do that for your Android devices. You can get the rear or front camera. If you don't actually know what the URL is going to be, what you can do, there's a couple of enumerators that you could use. If you search for enumerate, you can see under the capture devices, we could enumerate the different capture devices and then pick one based off of that. For example, if we did capture devices here, it'll spit out all the different devices. Like so, and then we could just get one of those, at which point we could break that apart to actually get the URL that would feed in to open the URL here. Okay. And another thing that you could do is you could filter by device as well. So if we drag off of this and we do it's a bit mask. Yeah, if we make a bit mask like so, I believe this is in the 418.2, I believe, has the tooltip that explains this a little bit as well. If you want to filter for different devices, you can come in and you could say, so like a webcam capture device, you could say only look for the front, like so, or only look for the rear, example, like so, and then you could feed through, get the URL and pipe it in, like so. So I haven't experimented with that just yet, but theoretically that's how it could work. I've seen it done here inside the office as we've been testing, but I haven't personally done it. Hopefully I'll get a how-to in our documentation pages for working with Android devices and pulling from your mobile cameras as well. If there's any other how-tos or documentation that you guys would like to see, feel free to throw that into the forum post, things that you'd like to know how to do. So I'm currently in the process of updating that documentation. Okay, there's some other things that I want to talk about as well here on the image media source. I forgot to talk about this. I'm going to hop back to our image media source here inside of the player here. So if we open our image media source, so this is just playing back those EXR files that we have. This one looks a little bit different than the standard file media source. So the file media source, we have this the time bar here. In the image media source, we have this little green time bar here. So I kind of wanted to explain what's happening here. This is essentially letting you know how many of your images have been pre-cached. Essentially, there's an option that I'll show you here in a second. This particular sequence is very small. It's only like 12 images. But as you're starting to work with EXRs, if you have past, for example, with our human race project, we used EXRs for those. Those files were 10 to 15 megs per image, and we had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of those. So you can see that the size will balloon up of your all of your images combined. That's kind of what this option here, it's letting you know how many of those images have been pre-cached. If we come to the edit and project settings, you'll see there's an option now under the image media section. Okay, so you can see there's caching options here. So we have the cache size, it's defaulted to 1 gig, like so. But for example, if we were to change this to something like 0.01, which is like 10 megs, I think. If we were to change that to something like that, you can see if we come back to our media player and we reopen it, you're going to see that it's kind of caching ahead up to our limit that we've specified. It's going to try to be intelligently pre-cache the next images so that you're getting the optimal playback rate here. We also have this little buffer in the back here. This allows you to, if you want to go into the project settings, it's this cache behind percentage. Right now we're set to 25% of the total caching here. If we were to bump this up to say something like 50, oops, not 0.5, but 50, like so. And we were to reopen this source here. The cache behind essentially allows you to scrub back and forth between the different images that you have. Just a way to kind of help allow you to work with the tools and work with the images that you have without having to load the whole image sequence in its entirety. Because again, as you start to work with these files, the file size could balloon up quite a bit, and you can see that it might be a little bit cumbersome there. So let's go ahead and close that out and close this out in this. And let's see, how are we doing on time? About 2:30. Let's see if there's any questions here as we're going along. I know that we got a couple questions on the forums that I didn't get a chance to answer. We could try to answer some of those. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I wanted to cover here today. I know in the forum post, there was kind of like a picture-in-picture thing that I did. It's very similar to what we did here for the webcam, except I just created a UMG widget, which I'll just do that for fun real quick. So we'll just call it UI. Let's go ahead and max this up. So if your game and if you created your game and you want to have it in stream, like a stream of yourself playing the game, for example, like you see on Twitch or on YouTube, you can do that inside the engine now, essentially. If you take an image and just plop it down like so, something like this, and we can just anchor it to the bottom right, like so. Take this image and under the brush, we could specify to use our material, player texture. Yeah, just do that. So, and then inside the level blueprint, we could just event begin play and create a widget. This is getting into UMG now, but that's kind of fun to show. We could create our UI widget and then just add it to the viewport. So, and our stream is set to be opened whenever we press 3. So theoretically, if we play, we should have a little thing down there, and we press 3. There we go. Now we got a picture-in-picture while I'm playing. So that's kind of what I did for the image in the forms, if you're wondering how that was working. So just wanted to show that real quick. Let's get to some of the questions that were on the forums since we're talking about them. Reached out to our team and tried to get some responses to most of those. Again, if there's any additional questions that come up that I can't answer, just throw those in the forums and we'll get responses to those. So the first question that we had was, are there plans to support the reverse 360 capturing? Media Framework currently only handles media input. We do not have a standardized API for output and video, or audio and video output just yet. The standardized API for audio video output is planned for 4.19. But as far as capturing outside of webcam capturing and from your capture card or from your phone, that's only the support of that I know of so far. Doesn't mean that it can't be supported in the future. It's just that it's not currently supported. Another question that we had is there a way to output the render window to a professional output card, like a Blackmagic deck link? With all the new development work being taking place in the field of real-time compositing, is this something that we can expect for the future? This is currently, video output is currently on our roadmap. We are planning to fully integrate UE4 with film and movie production, so the engine can be both a consumer of media for video compositing and a producer of media to compose externally in other hardware or software. This is from our engineers that specified this. This is planned. It's on our roadmap. I don't have a timeline for this, but just keep your eyes on our updates and release notes for when that comes online. Another question that we had was, is there a way to bring in image sequences with alpha to composite and render with sequencer? Starting in 4.18, this is possible using the image media plugin and EXR image sequences. As we mentioned, the image plugin, image media media source only supports EXR at this time. Will support PNG in future or additional file types in future updates. We haven't tested it yet, but EXR sequences should also synchronize with sequencer because you're getting that frame accurate information with the EXR file. Let's see. Rendering out video textures with sequencer causes a frame rate mismatch. This is still the case for other media player plugins. However, the image media derives its clock from the engine global time. So this should work with that particular plugin. You should no longer see that. We're also planning better support for the other player plugins in 4.19 as well. Again, Media Framework is an ongoing development. It's coming out of the experimental stages in 4.18, but it doesn't mean that we're ceasing development on it. As with our other tools, it's ever changing, and we're continuing to add new features and support to it as you guys request them. Another question. Let's see. What is the best encoder to use to create a 360 4K video that plays smoothly in UE4? This is a difficult question to answer. We don't have an official recommendation yet. 4K on Windows currently works best on Android because of the super fast path video sample pipeline that uses that external setting that I mentioned inside of the material. It's taking advantage of that. So on Android, it works best. We've ran two 4K videos in parallel on a Samsung S7. This is something that this 4K video support is something that we'll have in our documentation and how-tos on how to best set this up. We'll give you best practices as well. I believe our technical reference page also gives you some guidelines right now, which I'm in the process of updating as well. On Mac OS, this should also work reasonably, although there will be some CPU and memory overhead. On Windows, we currently only have a fairly slow sampling process pipeline that requires multiple buffer copies. 4K is doable, but it will require a fast CPU and fast memory. Like on our computers here, we haven't had a problem. That video that I showed you earlier was a 4K video. Our multiple track video was a 4K video. So it is doable. You just need to have the processing power, the CPU and memory to handle it. Let's see if there's any questions in the actual, wow, there's quite a few inside of Discord here. Let's see. So did you make the timelines able to be scaled smaller yet? Timelines inside of, I'm not quite sure what they mean here. They're talking about the timelines in here. I'm not quite sure what this question is referring to. Did you make timelines able to be scaled smaller yet? Maybe if I can get some more clarification on that in the forums, maybe I can get a better answer for that. It's a bit of naming. There's a bit of naming collision, but the intention of streaming source is for remote recorded videos and not streams, such as, say, this Twitch stream, correct? I don't know that Twitch stream support, like actual URL for a Twitch stream is supported. I know actually it's not supported yet. I don't know if it's going to be supported in the future. I know that we are planning to increase the support for the different URLs, starting with YouTube. I know that we're also working with Facebook 360 videos. I believe our programmers had said that they want to have that in for 4.19 as well, being able to work with 360 videos. So theoretically, down the road, I don't see why this couldn't be possible. It's just time and resources which we want to allocate to. If that's something that you guys really want and the demand is there, then we'll try to make that happen. I just don't have a timeline on when that will be. Is Media Framework also supported on Linux? It's not referenced to Windows Media Framework, correct? This should be supported on Linux. I'll have to get with our Linux guy on our team to see if we can get Linux documentation for this. I personally haven't worked with Linux too much, so I couldn't give an accurate statement on that, but I'll work with our team here to see if we can get Linux documentation for Media Framework and what you would need to do to get that to work if it doesn't work already. It's not referencing Windows Media Foundation directly. Does deactivating loop during runtime interrupt the loop cycle? Believes it does not stop the current playback. You would need to call the stop playback function to actually stop the media from currently playing. It will just not loop starting from the next media source. That actually brings up something that I did want to show as well here, and I'll get this in our documentation. But when working with streams, one of the things that you may want to do, so for example, if we have our event begin play here, let's just go ahead and delete this real quick. And we take our media player and we open source, okay? And let's go ahead and plug that in. Okay, and we open a stream media source here. So we're pulling from a URL here. And say, for example, on our media player here, we did not have this set to play on open. Or even if we did have it set to play on open, you might encounter some issues. But for example, say that we didn't have it play on open and we wanted to explicitly play this. For example, so if we come in here and we say play, like so. If we were to hook it up just like this, we may encounter some issues. Even if we were to do a file media source on a device trying to load that asset, directly calling play after opening a source, it may not actually play the source back because it hasn't fully opened yet. If you do leave it as play on open, actually, it'll make sure that the source is completely open before it tries to play it. So leaving that on, which is why it's on by default, if you want something to play as soon as you open it, is a safeguard. But if you're calling play explicitly without play on open set, you may run into some issues here. So one of the things that you could do here, you probably wouldn't want to add a delay. So you probably wouldn't want to drag off this, create a delay node of however many seconds, because you never know how long it's going to take to actually open it. There is a function that you could call if you drag off the media player reference here and use assign on opened. So assign on media opened. Okay, that's going to create a binding. So essentially what will happen if you're not Blueprint savvy here, we've created a binding so that when the actual media is opened, this event will get fired. So from here, you could actually call the play, like so. And you shouldn't run into any issues here. This should actually open it. It's just one of the things to consider. If you're explicitly using play, if you're opening a media source, it may take some time to open it. So you don't want to call play directly after opening or using the play on open inside of your player here. So just wanted to point that out. Let's see what else. What video and stream formats are supported with this? Right now, if you go to our documentation and our media framework, get back to our media framework documentation, which you could just search for media framework. It should come up. We do have a technical reference page here. We'll have an Excel sheet with all the different plugins and all the different file extensions and streams that we support. This documentation is pre-418. This documentation is currently being updated. In fact, when I get back to my desk, it's probably what I'm going to work on, is updating this. This documentation should be available at the time of the 418 release, so you should have the latest and greatest support here. But you could also download this as an Excel and keep it for your reference as well. But this should be, prior to 418, all of the ones that we support. Is it possible to process an image frame in the GPU and pass data back to a blueprint to drive actions? This is not something that I've currently experimented with. This is something I'll probably have to ask our programming team to see if this is possible. I'm not 100% sure. Probably through, there might be some C++ involved to get that to work. But it's something that I can investigate and try to get an answer to. Let's see, what else? Is it a good way to replace a flip book inside of a material, or is it more heavy? I'm not quite sure. The image sequences could be used to kind of mimic a flip book, like in Paper 2D flip book, if that's what you're referring to. You could use image sequences now that we support that. That's something that you have to experiment with and see if that kind of suits your needs. How do you use video codecs inside sequencer? Not sure inside of sequencer how that's done, but inside of the media framework tools, you could specify the different codecs from the playback options. Under the formats, you could specify those here, what those are. Let's see, for example, this one here. Yeah, this one only has the one. You should be able to set those inside of here if you add additional codecs and formats here, which this one doesn't. Let's see. Let's see. I think that's all I have for now. Again, if there's any additional questions that you guys have, feel free to throw those into the forums and I'll try to get answers to those. This is still relatively new. Some of the new changes and stuff I'm still experimenting with myself. And we'll try to get that documentation available to you, updated for 418. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. It's a little bit shorter of a stream, but I'm going to hop back to my desk, get back to work and working on those docs and checking out your questions on the forums to try to get answers for you. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for tuning in.